Hello and welcome to the 60 Voices podcast. My name is David Tickner and I'm the Chief Executive of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship. 60 Voices is a special podcast we launched to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship in 2025. And in this series, we'll be sharing the fascinating stories and personal reflections of former civil servants as they look back on their careers and the impact they had on the nation. Our plan is to conserve and preserve these very important work memories. From the challenges they face to the memorable moments that define their work, each episode offers a unique personal insight into the history of the UK civil service and the people who helped shape it. Whether you're a former colleague or someone interested in public service, join us as we explore the voices behind decades of dedication, service, and legacy. As always, I'm pleased to introduce my co-host for this series, which is Denise Headley, who is the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship's Deputy Chief Executive and has extensive background in broadcasting and commentary. But for this episode, we are more than delighted to welcome Sir Muir Gray. Sir Muir spent a lot of his professional career in the National Health Service. He held a variety of senior positions, including serving as the Director of Research and Development for Anglia and Oxford Regional Health Authority, and first establishing and then being a director for the UK National Screening Committee. He founded the National Library for Health and was director for Clinical Knowledge, Process and Safety for NHS England, National Programme for IT, serving as the director of the National Knowledge Service. And he was also the first person to hold the post of Chief Knowledge Officer of NHS England, whilst also serving as co-director of the Department of Health's Quality Innovation, Productivity and Prevention Right Care Programme. His mission of 50 years is how to help people live longer better. And he's published a book for people aged 70 called Sod 70, one for the younger decade with Claire Parker called Sod 60, and with the famous green goddess Diana Moran, a book called Sod Sitting, Get Moving, and a book on diet, Sod It, Eat Well, a lot of sodding about. Based on his research and experience, he has also developed a new model to help people live longer better, which compresses the morbidity at the end of life and to reduce the incidence of dementia and frailty, and therefore reduce the need for social care. After that humongous introduction, it's delighted me to say welcome to 60 Voices podcast, Sir Muir. We're pleased to have you here. So to kick off, I know obviously people listening to this will think, has he had time to work in the civil service? But as with all good careers, everyone finds a little bit of schedule. When did you join the civil service, and what made you choose it as a career choice when you did join?
Well, I'd always been fascinated by the civil service, I think thanks to C.P. Snow and Corridors of Power. And even more insightful, a book called The New Men, which was about the making of the atom bomb, where you had not only civil servants and politicians, but civil servants, scientists and politicians. Mm-hmm. So over the years, I have looked at, I don't know if it's still there, a Lincoln Link, is that how you pronounce it, in Hampshire?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
I'd often
down in Basingstoke, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd often looked in the Sunday Times and thought, I wonder, should I apply to the civil service? And I was very, in the NHS, things were a good place to work. But I've always been very interested in the civil service, and I've never criticized the civil service once, inside there or outside there. And I've been very influenced by an American sociologist called Charles Perrow. And he said, well, if you complain about bureaucracy, you want to try living in a country that doesn't have a stable, incompetent bureaucracy. So I've always been a great admirer of the civil service, but I thought it was maybe not right for me. I was more interested in the scientific side, but of course, as I say, the new men, clearly they're scientists in the civil service. Although I was told that the non-scientists were at grades 1, 3, 5, 7, and the scientists were 2, 4, 6, and 8. That's what someone told me. However, in 1996, a significant change took place in the health service. And something called, I was Director of Public Health for Oxford Regional Health Authority, which was, there were 14 regions at the time. And there were 14 regions because London was divided into 4 on the Blitz clearing railway lines, and there were 10 provincial medical schools. But as more medical schools came in, number 14 seemed to be inappropriate. So they stayed with a small number, and Mrs. Thatcher formed Anglia and Oxford. It is said because she didn't want a single London health authority, because she didn't want Ken Livingstone to be running the NHS in London. So she split London north and south, and she stuck together East Anglia and Oxford. So it was from Newbury to King's Lynn was our territory, based in
Quite a big area to
Milton
cover,
Keynes.
I should think.
It was quite a drive from Newbury to King's Lynn. And, we were based in Milton Keynes. But that was something, a new initiative called the NHS R&D program. And there we really became, as part-time, became part of the civil service with Sir Michael Peckham in the lead. And a certain amount was top sliced from the NHS budget and given to the regional directors of research and development to invest. So that's when I became a civil servant. It was not clearly defined, but it was the job was never advertised, just it was created.
So was your route in, Sir Muir? I mean, obviously, some of the people we've spoken to on previous episodes have had different routes in terms of sitting, formal interviews, sitting exams. I mean, presumably because you had extensive background in the health service, your route in was perhaps swifter than somebody starting their beginning of their career as a civil servant, or not. Did you have to go through all the tests and everything that they did at Alençon Link or not?
No, nothing. We were doing the job, and the job was moved to the civil service.
Okay, I'm with you. And I'm guessing you were attached to Department for Health, obviously.
That's right, yes.
Probably. Did you work in any other departments, or was it just Department for Health that you were involved?
No, but over the years, I've done a lot of work with other departments. I remember working with the Department for the Environment.
Mm-hmm.
They were wanting to cut back. The building research establishment was not increasing insulation. One of my long-standing interests has been the prevention of hypothermia.
Oh.
And so I worked with the Department for the Environment, and they told me, we went to a meeting, and they said, I said, you're changing your standards. You're not changing them fast enough. It's a housing problem, not a health problem. But they finish up in hospital. And they said to me, well, how much heat do people need? And I said, well, enough to sit in shirt sleeves like we're all doing today. So we're all in a nice warm office making decisions about hypothermia. So I worked a lot with the environment, then with culture, media, and sport, or its predecessors, and tried to engage with the Treasury without very much success.
Was that because you were asking for money?
Yes, and well, it was about the allocation of money.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think at the moment, the NHS is asking for £22 billion more, but primary schools can't afford to employ physical education teachers. So from a health perspective, that doesn't seem a good decision. And it was more actually trying to get departments to work together that I wanted the Treasury to do, to get them in the one room so I could speak to them all about living longer better, as opposed to having to deal with about half a dozen different departments. So it's more the Treasury as an enabler than a funder.
Exactly.
Dee, you were going to say something?
Yes, I was. Thank you, Samir. I was saying it's still an issue now, that togetherness in terms of the way the departments work and having that more holistic outlook when you're dealing with questions around health. Because I used to be a counsellor back in the day, and I sit on the older people's and scrutiny panel. And one of the joys that I had was at the time, before we went cabinet system, those scrutiny panels actually had money. So you were able to direct particular programs towards the need, because the residents would come and tell you. You'd also have a lead member. The lead member would have a budget, and then you can allocate resources. And that was a holistic way of actually addressing health concerns for older people in the area that I was living in at the time. But I understand that difficulty of having all of the people in the room. You have all the, I think the cross agencies is the language, so that you deliver effectively for individuals. So for argument's sake, you would have more PE teachers in schools. You'd probably have qualified chefs and
Yes.
dinners, proper food in the schools. I mean, that was part of what Jamie Oliver was trying to do,
Yes.
to actually address health and well-being in a holistic way, and not just at the end when people present, like you're saying, with the health service.
Yes. And no need for the word sir, the word sir, actually, unless we're trying to impress someone.
Okay, so I just call you Muir.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, Muir, that's cool.
Well, I think I think Dee's got a question, I think, coming up.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah.
Muir. Okay, so how did your work shape your life personally? Were there ways in which your role changed your views and your approach to life?
Yes, I've always been fairly detached from. I've been very influenced by the Japanese over the years. Firstly, in terms of quality, and I set up the screening programs based on Toyota. But then the Japanese also are very interesting the way their organizations work, and I went to visit them. They say in the West, you run things like a relay race. The top of the office passes the baton to the middle and passes it to the front line. We do things like a rugby team. You get a team of 10 or 12 people together. You don't change the bureaucracies in any way. And that team floats beside the bureaucracy. They call it a hypertext organization in 1995. And that's what I've always tried to do. Sometimes I say, well, I'm in guerrilla operations, or sometimes I say the key thing is to keep your boss happy 3 days a week. Another 2 days a week, you get on with doing what's really important to do. But the language of the hypertext organization is important. We do need bureaucracies, but the problems we're dealing with are too complex for any bureaucracy, or even or any market, or even a combination of bureaucracy and markets. You need complex adaptive systems, like an ant colony. So whatever I've been doing, I've been floating beside organizations and not too embedded in any one. One's paid my salary and my travel expenses. That's very good. But what we're doing is too complex for any bureaucratic solution. So that's what I've tried to do, is to float beside the bureaucracies. And it's, in some ways, it could be stressful, but I've never really found it stressful. And they say, keep your boss happy 3 days a week, and the other 2 days a week, you decide what's really important.
But talking about that, I know this is not on our list of questions, but I just wanted to pick your brain in terms of you floating at the side of what's happening and changes. In terms of like the older people and their reaction to AI, okay, what's your thoughts around that, and how that then features into the way in which we age and the nature of that aging?
Well, I think we have to distinguish aging from 3 other processes that affect us as we live longer. One of them is lots of fitness, physical and mental. And many civil servants, of course, are exposed to that terrible occupational hazard called sitting.
That's very true.
And yes, that's right. We should stand up after 30 minutes. We'll stand up when the ad breaks come on. And I'm trying to introduce a walking program to the civil service as part of Living Longer Better, that everyone should walk briskly 30 minutes a day. Then there's disease. Now, most diseases are not caused by aging, and they're not caused by lifestyle. They're caused by the environment in which we live, because the genome that we've developed over hundreds of generations is one that suits being continually active and putting on fat very quickly if you manage to find some calories. That's completely unsuited to the modern environment. This is Daniel Lieberman of Harvard's hypothesis, which is very good. And then the third factor, loss of fitness, disease, and social factors. Deprivation affecting too many people, and ageism affecting everyone. So things like AI, well, I remember being told 50 years ago, old people have never used a telephone when I was trying to set up a telephone service at the weekend for older people. And now good work's been done on digital inclusion. And of course, there's different cohorts come through. So AI is just another thing like electricity or the telephone or the internet.
Do you think it's an inevitability then? So I think so. Talk of resistance is futile, so to speak. It will inevitably, like you mentioned, the telephone. You know, when people first thought that, oh, we can't possibly have a telephone in our house.
Yes.
20 years from now, we'll all be, you know, it'll be fully embedded, and everyone will not be batting an eyelid. I mean, one of the things we picked up on, particularly during COVID, on that was that the fact that an awful lot of our community of later years felt completely marginalized by the fact that so many businesses and organizations immediately switched to doing everything online and didn't have any facility to allow them to engage. And there's a degree of feeling, I think, again, from those people from probably post 85 and upwards in that age who aren't particularly proficient with computers or don't want anything to do with computers, that they are being marginalized in terms of, and businesses are using the excuse of, oh, well, nobody goes here, or nobody uses a branch, or nobody goes to a bank, or nobody needs a counter service or a post office. And actually, when you go out and about in town centres, there are a hell of a lot of people who do still go into town centres. Okay, they don't shop in the way they used to, but they often want to do basic things like pay a check-in or go to the post office or whatever it may be. And I still think there is a degree of, whilst I would agree that AI is an inevitability, I think that while it is becoming embedded, I think the government or whoever it is who's driving it needs to take into consideration there are a lot of people who are still out there who are A, probably very fearful of technology in all sorts of forms, and B, allowing accessibility to services in a way that can keep them, you know, mental and health well-being in the right form.
Yeah, well, and our living longer better system, which is I hope going to go government-wide, digital inclusion is one of the key themes within it. And again, there's interesting ways of doing that. Before COVID, my plan was to get school children to go and meet older people, and they help them learn about the internet. But the school children would also learn from older people about life and what has happened. So intergenerational work is very
important.
Yeah.
Some young people don't even have access to people over 30.
No. So it's hard to think in different ways about how we do that. And the new housing policy that's come out from the Department of Housing, if it's still called that, leveling up, I think it may be called now, is very good in promoting intergenerational. Well, not saying older people should live in blocks of flats out in the periphery.
But that's quite a European thing, isn't it? I mean, if you go into mainland Europe, I mean, my parents were my dad was ex-military and stationed in Germany, and I mean, the German housing was generational, so they would often have quite a large house, and the grandparents were in the quite flat in the basement, and the children were upstairs, and so there was a sort of looking out for all the generations under one roof, which I'm always been surprised that was never picked up on to such a great degree in the UK. But the idea of encouraging, if you've got a bigger house, to encourage a younger person to live with them, I think is a good step in that right direction.
Yeah, but the history is, this is Keith Thomas, the number one historian on old age. It was usually near but not with was the pattern in the villages, near but not with. So what I tried to do with my civil service role, which broadened out, because I am not a great observer of boundaries. So when I was in the Department of Health in Wellington House, then I started working in a different way. And then after, I think I told you I've changed the word retirement for renaissance. So after renaissance in 2005, 2004, then I decided that I would start to work in a different way. So I started working for NHS England, which is technically part of the civil service, but of course there it's an agency, isn't it? It's across the river from the Department of Health. So I felt that I could see the opportunities, having learned a lot more about the civil service and a lot more about the national organisation of the NHS, I could see how the work I was doing. So there were two things I was doing. One is called better value healthcare. About 15% of all the money we spend in health does no good. There's £1 billion spent in drugs for older people, for example, that do no good. So that's better value healthcare. And then the other half was living longer better. So I then started working for NHS. But that was, I think I was probably a contractor at that time, but people didn't understand what your precise position was. And by that time I'd learned a lot about how to work with the civil service. And of course, for me, the civil service was interesting because as you come from the north, from Scotland, southern England is a different country. They said to me in Oxford when I arrived, well, what about the violence of Glasgow? I said, it's nothing to the polite violence of the southern English. And you,
Accent that. And
Yes.
and lots of the time people like to use Glasgow as an example of a particular type of not lawlessness, but I don't think that's the case. I think it depends very much on what you're looking at, and they always have kind of negative views about
Yeah.
Scotland and knife crime, because there was a huge thing about knife crime in Glasgow and
Yeah, sure.
as a health issue, not a crime issue, and it made huge differences.
Yeah. Well, I said, no, I said the polite violence of the southern English. I learned about that from C.P. Snow and Jane Austen, actually. So no one in Glasgow says with the greatest respect. In Oxford, of course, is the capital of southern England, the cultural capital of southern England. I know in our region, our capital's Godalming, but Godalming doesn't make the pulse beat very quickly. So culturally, it was very interesting for me because the civil service in those days was very much Oxford dominated. And even though in the Trevelyan reforms of the 1851, the natural sciences were emphasized as being important, it was very much the classics or PPE. PPE went into politics and the classics went into the civil service. So it was very interesting for me coming to the civil service and meeting the upper echelons, and they were very much Oxford, Southern English in Oxford was the sort of style with the language.
We picked up on that in some of the other contributions that we've had from civil servants who've taken part in 60 Voices. And they quite often they speak of the hierarchical nature of the civil service, such as, observing particular types of manners or referring to people as sir, or when particular people used to come into the room, they would have to stand. And I think for like yourself, you're saying you came from Scotland and you observed, what did you call it? The polite violence. I mean, that's, talk about, that's a very interesting term, but that's very much the case. But also they talked about the fact that they would have been what we call now working class, and they move into this environment, which is Oxbridge and Cambridge, and they're very much outside of it, even though they're civil service. And I think that's what you're alluding to with your contribution there.
Yeah, and also the English and the way the letters were written and drafted. I remember a civil servant about 30 years ago saying to me, he said, there's a different language. You have to learn the language. Happy to discuss, for example, means F off and die.
Absolutely. And the thing is, when you're in politics, you actually know that it's the language of understatement. I mean, I recently read a book called Inglorious Empire, and it's talking about the relationship of exploitation of the East India Company over India. And the importance, I mean, that the British were in India for 457 years. That was how long that occupation was. The part of the way in which you conducted that was to constantly understate, the language of understatement, to diminish the impact of brutality. And that's exactly what you just said. It's polite violence, but it's done in a very soft way. So happy to discuss means, like you said, thank you and good night, and don't come back. The CSRF, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, is a charity set up for civil servants by civil servants. In 1960, Douglas Houghton MP highlighted the need for an organisation that supported retired civil servants offering friendship and companionship. 59 years later, we are still carrying on his dream. You can find out more about the CSRF at our website, www.csrf.org.uk. Why not sign up to become a digital donor for £3, less than the price of coffee? Or you may wish to volunteer. Contact us via the website.
There you go. That we've living proof that we're following the recommendations that Muir's given us. Standing up after 30 minutes. And it is actually 30 minutes we've been talking, which is good.
My next question, do you?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so Muir, are there any anecdotes from your civil service career or from other areas that you'd like to bring in that are funny and memorable that you think, made you think a little bit more, chuckle a little bit while you're at the civil service?
Well, I was also so very interested in the way in which the relationship between the civil servants and the politicians, having seen a number of different types of government, and my wife's naturally political in her. She was a city councillor. I'm one of nature's officials, and I think I've always looked at it all as vaguely amusing, because a sense of humor. What we're doing is too serious to be taken without a sense of humor, and I think the sort of things that I remember from my days in the civil service were when people were surprised when we did something. For example, when I set up the National Cervical Cancer Screening Program, I wasn't a civil servant at the time, but I just bought a website and put it up. And then I told the civil service later what I've done. And one of the members, there was at that time a committee of gynecological screening, and I never even knew it existed, but it wasn't doing anything. I just set up a national screening program. And a friend told me, well, when he went to the last meeting of the committee, it was the sign the porters had made in the door was the Committee for Gynecological Psychology, not cytology. So I've always been a little bit of an outsider in that way, and not been, but I've been a very good. Someone said to me once, "You've taken a lot of risks in your career," and I've said I've never taken a risk. I've always said I'm a great believer in administration. Actually, I think the health service used to be over-administered and under-managed. It's now over-managed and under-administered. And the distinction, of course, between leadership changes culture, management delivers, and the administration is very important. So even when I had a huge budget of dozens of millions of pounds, I had the same secretary for 40 years. And if I dictated a letter that promised someone £5, it would pass to my administrator for approval. And I never was in trouble once with an audit committee or had any problem because I respected the administration. And so that's one of the things now. I think in some ways we're under-administered and you get too many people in sort of middle-level management, but without clear strategic leadership. I've been very influenced by the military, actually, over the years. They don't do strategic, operational, and tactical decision-making, and the importance of language. And of course, that's one of the benefits of Oxford is it's the capital of the English language. The BMW and the English language are the main products. And starting to think in a way of, in the military, as you know, is got what they call doctrine and a staff college. And the civil service is quite good in doctrine and staff college, but when it gets out into the field, it's a lot of very sloppy language use and sloppy thinking.
Although I would say that one of the things that's, I think, a great shame is that they closed the National School of Government, because that was a blue ribbon. I mean, as you were saying, in terms of training, and our Ascot and Sunningdale group, when I first joined the CSRF 16 years ago, and I was going out and about a lot more in the early years, visiting we had a lot more groups. Yes. The Ascot and Sunningdale group used to meet at the National School of Government, and it was internationally recognized as a training place for thinkers, civil servants. People would come from the world over to learn, and that went was one of the programs that they axed quite some years ago. And I think the building has now been taken over by a hotel chain and has got no use whatsoever with what it used to be.
I just wanted to pick up on a point that you raised, Muir, in relation to being an outsider. I wonder if you could just maybe think about that a little bit more and share. Do you think the fact that you were perceived as an outsider, not necessarily that you felt that way, that was an advantage to you because you were able to do things that other people weren't able to do, for argument's sake, in the civil service or in terms of the work that you're doing now? I mean, you're probably more of an insider now, but you still had that, Sir Muir, do you think that that has anything to do with the way things have progressed for you? The fact that you are viewed as someone who is an outsider?
Well, I think that the Scottish accent's worth about 10%, I think. I was in television once explaining some problem to do with screening, and I came back to the Department of Health and said, "How did I do?" Very plausible. They said, "Very plausible." So the Scots it's much better having a Scottish accent. I think having a Newcastle accent or a Birmingham accent is much more difficult. But the Scots, they can't classify us in any way. Socially, they can't. I mean, England, Southern England, looks down its nose a bit at the Northern England.
Snobbishness.
And Oxford, of course, it's very interesting, Oxford, that it doesn't cut much ice in England. You know, if you go to Middlesbrough or someone, say you're from Oxford, it doesn't cut much ice. But there's a thing called the inverse square law. The further you get from Oxford, the greater reputation. So people I'm working with in Brazil, say, were over a conference, and as soon as they heard we were working with people from Oxford, that made all the difference. So Brazil and China and also with India, and there's still been interested in this aspect of the civil service. There's still a menswear shop in Oxford, and as you go up the stairs, painted in the wall, it says something like "Time to get your apparel for Tanganyika, Nyasaland, South Africa, and the ICS, the Indian Civil Service." So, you know, these young Latin graduates would have married a vicar's daughter from Hampshire and set off to be Deputy Governor General in Gujarat or somewhere.
Yeah.
Richmond House, I think, was the headquarters of the colonial service.
Okay. I didn't do Latin at school, sorry. I did have a small inscription on my blazer, Spiritus Mens Corpus. I think that's mind, body, and soul. But that's
Yes. Yeah, good.
the extent of
Well,
it.
you remembered that, Dee.
Well, there's a couple of profanities that I don't think were appropriate for the podcast. Okay, so can I just also, when you spoke about your retirement, you called it Renaissance. I like that idea. So could you tell us a bit, when did your Renaissance begin and what have you been doing since your Renaissance?
Well, that's what I'd like to do with the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship. And I'm very keen with you to bid to the civil service for you to get resources. And we start at 55, getting people to think. And we'll be seeing that through the Live Longer Better system when I get that adopted by the Department of Health. And we should start with this. I've written to the Chief Medical Officer about this too. Would he support this? So the issue in terms of Renaissance is starting to think about finding either I've carried on largely what I was doing before, but it's very clear if you want to reduce your risk of dementia and frailty and compress morbidity at the end of life, then activity is the key issue. Physical, cognitive, and emotional, the three dimensions. And interestingly, it's also clear that there are certain types of activity which are even better for you. One is challenge. Second, another is purpose. So becoming a volunteer is very good. And then in terms of challenge, getting on the committee of a voluntary society is even better because you're challenged. So this is really what I've been doing. I'm carrying on with the work of value-based healthcare, and because I was nearly there under the last Labour government before the land-led reforms came. So I'm still hoping. I mean, by that I mean I could tell you how much we spend in Oxfordshire, probably the nearest pound as a public record, on car parking and insurance, on legal fees, staff, £796 million. I can't tell the nearest £40 million how much we spend on heart disease or respiratory disease. I had program budgeting running 15 years ago, but then that went. So that's half my life as a value, but the other is living longer, better. And that is where I think organizations like the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, and then starting to think, if it is a fellowship, yes, it's very good to be a member, and I'm a member, as you know, but how do we reach the other civil servants who are not members? Let's set up a digital well-being service for them. Because the pensions people have got everyone's name, address, and age. So I'm very interested in getting a walking program going. I'm a great believer in birthday cards, not just to promote my books, but my sod 70s are real in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. But I think we should send people a birthday booster every year.
Oh, I love that. A birthday booster.
Yeah.
That's wicked.
Yeah. Because every year you need to do a little bit more, because the effects of aging is to reduce resilience. So activity becomes even more important every year. But 5 minutes more stretching, or even a minute more stretching every day, that's 365 minutes a year, 366 in a leap year. We should be promoting that with birthday cards. And then the big bang birthdays, 60, 70, 80, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. We should be saying to people, time to really reflect and plan. And here's groups for you to do it. Now, that does, of course, require digital, although we could do it with paper to start off with. And paper is very important. And a paper birthday card going to people 60, 70, 80, 90 would be the sort of thing that a business would do.
We've got the pen pal service, Muir. We have that pen pal service where we dig people and writing letters, because I find from my own learning, writing something out is easier and it makes it more memorable.
Yes, it's essential.
Do it.
Yeah. We should send people a health diary, and they can record their walks and their weight and how they're feeling and what you've
Use your no-nonsense approach, though, Muir, to cut through GDPR. So if you've got any solution to how to get rid of the Gordian knot on that, because that's been one of the biggest problems that we have faced for donkey's years as an organization. The data protection acts, when they were brought in and obviously updated from data protection bill to GDPR, and there is a new protection bill currently, I think, at the Lord stage of the committee reading, that will effectively enshrine most of what GDPR stands for into a bit. It's a post-Brexit bill that's still going through the reading process. But where the civil service failed, in my opinion, and where the NHS was sensible, is before GDPR came in, the NHS did write to all of its pensioners to make them aware of the fact there was a data protection change, and to obviously allow them to, update their preferences to continue receiving information from organisations that were there to support them. The civil service people didn't do that. So there was no letter that went out with a data preference change or a, advisory. And as a consequence, every single conversation we have had, and I've been having numerous since 2018 when GDPR came in, about what can you do to unlock access to information. We're not asking you to personally give it to us. We're asking you to make sure the people who you are looking after get access to what we want to send as a recognised welfare body within the civil service. We're told, well, we can't do that because the data protection preferences haven't been amended. The only way we could do that is if we write to everybody again, and that would cost in excess of £1 million. And the only way we'd do that is if you and other welfare bodies would foot the bill, which of course we don't have the money to do.
No. Okay.
So it is a constant, I think, honestly, nobody really understands data protection. Sense that they use it as a sort of protective umbrella. Say, and yes, of course, there are some very sensible parts of it, because you don't want people, unilaterally scamming you or having access to personal information, people who are going to use it for bad things. But it's like anything, there should be a sort of like a filtration process of saying, well, there are areas of need, and we are providing a direct need for members of the civil service, both serving and former. We are accepted by Cabinet Office as a recognised welfare body. We are not selling them items they don't want. So therefore we are we have a right to be included in information as far as that goes. So I think that's always been a problem. I mean, the pension scheme is about to change. They are obviously, my CFP, who have been running the pension scheme, are finishing. They finish at the end of this year, and it switches back to Capita, who will be taking the contract from the end of this year. There is not
This calendar year.
Yes, yeah. So I would hope, I mean, I'm waiting. I actually have got a meeting with the contact at Civil Service Pensions in the next couple of weeks to obviously talk about what that transition will mean, and obviously also what opportunities that might provide for raising awareness for our organisation. I'm not holding my breath, but Capita at least have previous experience of running this scheme, and when they were running it, we used to have leaflets go into I mean, obviously it's all digital now, but we would have leaflets included in the initial mailing for anybody appearing on coming up to their pension age. So they would be written to by Capita saying you're approaching your retirement, you know, this is things you need to know about your pension. Oh, and by the way, we've included leaflets for the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, the Benevolent Fund, Pensions Alliance, so you have information about, you know, what you might need when you're there. And we used to get quite a lot of interest from that. So there is an opportunity to take advantage of the transition to see if there's any reboot that we can achieve in that area, I think.
Well, supposing I wrote to you as a member,
Yeah,
but also as a medical so-called expert, saying that many civil servants will have health problems resulting from 30 years of sitting,
yeah,
and compulsory sitting, and there was no occupational health service as there would have been for, say, radiation, so that every day you've got to take 30 minutes walking, and I would certainly like the civil. I've written, but I've got a new book coming out, called Dr. Gray's Walking Cure, my new walking book, and we're launching 2 campaigns. Angela Rippon's launching Let's Dance on the 2nd of March, and I'm launching Let's Walk More on the 1st day of spring.
sounds excellent.
So we're saying that the civil service has been a negligent employer, but the evidence is that at any age you can recover lost fitness and ability, and this will compress mobility at the end of life and reduce your need for social care. And but we now have the means to do this, and we don't need to collect any information from anyone, because the citizen is the most important provider of self-care. So if I wrote you for discussion with Capita, then
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be excellent. And incidentally, Muir, on those 2 books, obviously post-interview, could you let us have the publicity, the PR people for the books?
Sure.
Because we would obviously we can include those in the next issue of
Yeah, sure.
News.
Oh yes, you're I'd certainly do that. And I say I'm very keen. It's something practical. I'll send you a note about the Let's Walk More. We might do that in March or April. And Angela Rippon's doing Let's Dance. Angela Rippon's terrific. She's got me involved. She needs a bit of glamour, I think, so she got me involved.
So we're not we likely to see you on Strictly, are we?
Yeah, I don't know, but she's getting 6,000 dance schools doing things, and dance is a fantastic form of exercise, of course.
Cool.
So these are things that are happening. But let's see that you are a health service, and the civil service has been. It maybe didn't appreciate the dangers of sitting. I'm sure it did, but never thought there was anything could be done about it. So it's been negligent, and the long-term consequences of sitting for 30 years. Now, no, not every civil servant is sitting all the time, but it's since the computer game, that's been the way of it. Then there are means, and it's the duty of the employer, but it would also be government policy to help people become even more active physically, cognitively, and emotionally. And that means we've got to give people information.
Absolutely.
Sounds fabulous. Thank you, Sir Muir.
Could I ask a slight tangential question about obviously what you've done since you've started your Renaissance, particularly about your role as an author? How did you come into that? I mean, obviously, I guess you've probably written extensive reports and theses during your career, but
No, I wrote my first book on old age in 1979 called Our Elders, Oxford University Press.
yeah,
And my first book on prevention in 1981 So I'm sort of the Barbara Cartland of the NHS.
That's a nice snappy quote there, Muir. You do realise that might be pulled out as a.
Yes.
But the Sod 70, that was the first book specifically on that series of living well.
It started when I was 60, and the third time someone said, "How's it feel to be 60?" I said to them, "Oh, F60, you just got to get an F in grip." So I started a book called F60, and didn't finish it. But when I was 70, I finished a book, and I called F70 to the publisher. Well, we don't like the title. I said, it'd be wonderful if it was banned, would it not? Well, we don't mind the F word, but we're English graduates. We prefer alliteration. So they came up with Sod 70.
And presumably, I mean, obviously, the fact that you've had several spin-offs from the original book suggests that it's still people still seek it out, people buy it, and.
Oh well, but I think this is very interesting. I was in a major bookshop yesterday, and they had 26 stacks of books for children, and not one shelf for people aged over 50.
Wow.
They had a little section, one stack on mind, body, and spirit. But you'd have thought there's a huge market for people 50 plus getting worried about.
So did you reorder the book cadenzas? Did you have a stash of your books there when you left? There were like 3 facings of Sod 70, or the one with Diana Moran. How did you get involved with Diana Moran? Presumably from the exercise point of view.
Yeah, she made contact with me, telling me about it. Yeah. But but I have got the name and contact details of the chief exec of the book chain, so I've got to have a little campaign.
Very good.
But it's a good business. If you look at the age of people in bookshops.
That's true.
What's the Muir? Because if you think about books now, most books are digital. You know, look at the rise of Audible, and some people now listen to and they use podcasts. Because I know for myself, if I want something read to me and it's quite extensive, I know it's going to take me a very long time. So I would just call it up on the computer, and I'll get the computer to read it to me. That way you are actually getting this in the same way. So the whole idea of reading has taken on a different, it's developed over the last, I would say 15 years. And since Joe Rogan, the podcast that he does, podcasting as a business is moved, and Audible books as a business have moved. I mean, is your book available in Audible?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Only to be listened to while walking.
But did you record it? So is it you reading your own book?
No, but I've said I'm going to do the second edition of it, which just come out.
Oh, all right, very good.
Because of the Dr. Finlay accent.
Well, I think your accent's lovely, and I think that's change happened, because I know, as you said, that whole thing you're speaking about, the accent and the way people police language as a means of access, that's something that, that's clear. You always have to be conscious of that, especially as a Black person, as a woman. My experience of working in certain places is that if you speak in a particular way, you give certain language, you're treated in a particular way. So like you said, language is policed, and it's a way of determining status. So in the civil service, if you came in and you spoke like you were from Canning Town, or you're from the Gorbals, you were seen as different from someone who went to, a prep school in Shoreditch. Because it doesn't matter what your quality is, but just your diction alone would give you a certain status, and it still applies. But
I mentioned Dr. Finlay. Do you know who Dr. Finlay is? You're too
young. Sorry, no, I don't, Mio.
Have a look at Dr. Finlay. Black and white television. And every Sunday night, the whole of Great Britain tuned in. He was a doctor in a little town in Scotland in the 1930s, when there was no effective drugs. Just
his housekeeper was called Janet, wasn't it?
Janet, that's right, yes. Dr. Cameron.
Yeah.
But if you're speaking to an audience of over 70s, just mention the word Dr. Finlay and the whole room sits up. And my wife calls me Finlay. She was in love with Dr. Finlay.
Oh, was she?
I turned up, yes.
So, Mio, can I just say you should also consider doing some animation? because animation is really a good way of getting your message across. It's just a YouTube channel, a YouTube channel with animation and shorts and also little videos, because lots of people are looking for information and advice about how they maintain their cognition, their fitness. And I think it's really an important conversation that I think has more cogency now, because if you look at the UK, we have a growing population of mature people. So
let's get serious and try and get some money for the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship.
100%.
Yeah, and then you could sell it to others.
Absolutely.
It doesn't need to be done for everyone, but some of these big employers, I mean, some senior civil servants will be on the boards of insurance companies, or retired civil servants will be on the boards of big pension companies or insurance companies.
So
But I think if we did it with civil service, that'd be a good start. Okay. And presumably I mean, the head of the civil service, we should just write to the head of the civil service and say, look, there's a duty, there's negligence here, and for a couple of £1 million petty cash, and we could do a lot.
yeah, well, that's certainly food for thought on that front. I've got a quick question. Obviously, I'm appreciative of coming up to the top of the hour, and you've very kindly given us almost an hour of your busy day. It doesn't sound like you have much time for actually putting your feet up at all. Do you, when you're not doing all of the things you're doing and have been doing, and you've explained to us, is there something that how do you switch off? I mean, is there a tip in your Renaissance that goes, or do you go all the time and then just sleep, or is there something you can do to relax and put your feet up? Speaking.
Yes, I like walking, obviously, but mostly I do my phoning walking, so I combine two things. But music is my main interest, and here again, starting to think how we use digital. So think of our Civil Service Retirement Fellowship members who are isolated. And you can be isolated in a care home because you're very interested in Wagner or jazz or Ronnie Donegan or Charles Dickens or Preston North End Football Club, but no one else in the home has ever heard of these things. So I'm very interested also in how we can use the digital means of setting up communities of people, special interest groups. And I don't know how much we're doing that at the moment in the fellowship. But of course,
we want to do a lot more. I mean, one of the things we are very aware of is obviously the shrinkage of volunteers. And you mentioned at the beginning about volunteering being an important way of obviously maintaining cognition and well-being and all of those elements. I mean, we're totally on board with that. And when we were first founded in the sort of first 10 years, obviously the civil service was a very different beast than it is now. And at the heyday, there were over 700 groups under the CSRF umbrella all over the UK, managed by 101 branches, in true civil service fashion, and as many administrative layers in as possible to ensure that it all runs smoothly. I mean, we don't have that many now, but we are fully aware of the fact that there are an awful lot of people out there who can't get along to a local group or don't have a local group in their area. One of our colleagues was thinking about the idea of reinstalling an interest in telephone groups, which obviously if people are housebound, they can at least get some form of interaction through the telephone in the good old sort of telephone conferencing concept. Lunch groups are another idea that we've got.
And our digital village,
Digital village. Yeah, we tried that, which is an idea of creating social online. And I think there's a whole raft of things that if we had, our challenge, I think, as a charity is access to resources, access to information, and access to people. And I think that the people and information is galling because it is there. It's just a question of persuading people that they need to do more. I will give the civil services due in the last 2 to 3 years. They have made more of an effort to promote the actual fact that there are charitable organizations for the benefit of their staff. So they've implemented an online week once a year called CS Charities Week. And during that week, departments are encouraged to include information about us, the Benevolent Fund, and the Sports Council. And this year, they are hoping to do an event at the beginning of that, which will actually be hosted by the Cabinet Secretary, a physical event which they haven't done before, which will provide an opportunity for all of our respective organisations to actually talk directly to heads of internal communication and, importantly, HR wellness leads in departments as well. So if you are around, I will send you information. We have a guest allocation of people to come under our umbrella. And it's in London on Monday, the 17th of March. It's in Lancaster House. I'm just waiting on a confirmation of details, but I'll send you information.
Yeah, sure.
Basically, and if you were around,
But
you'd be very welcome.
let me write you about negligence to go to the head of the civil service.
Yeah. Anyway, I think on that note, it's a good note and a good note. I would just like to obviously conclude by saying a huge thank you to Muir for giving us your time. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I feel as though we could probably talk for another 2 to 3 hours without taking a breath. Although we'd be standing up on half hour.
We'd be walking. We
would be. But just to conclude, as always, we hope that you've enjoyed this episode.
I've enjoyed it. Yes.
Good. And for those people who are listening in on Spotify or through the website, do check out the other episodes that we've got. We've got a lot more planned in the pipeline. And if you're not following us on social media or keeping an eye on our website, we would encourage you to do so.
And listen while walking.
Absolutely. And make sure that walking is a paramount part of what you do in retirement.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Cindy.
It was lovely to speak to you. We hope to speak to you again in the future.
Definitely.
Definitely keep in touch. Take care. Bye-bye.
Let's start the campaign. Live longer,
we
better.
will. Thank you very much, Mia.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.